Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Faith, Culture, Politics in Australia with Mark. And now I'm going to introduce to you today's guest, who has been on the podcast before, and I'll just run through that now. Today I've got Professor Ted Steele, who actually joined me over 3 years ago now to talk about origins of COVID-19, amongst many, many other things. And more recently, he also joined me about a year ago talking regarding to pushing back on the lab leak theory and person-to-person spread with Professor Ted Steele. And just for those that haven't heard of Professor Steele, just a quick one. He's an Australian molecular immunologist with interests in virology and evolution. He's an honorary research associate at C.Y. O'Connor Irade Village Foundation in Piara Waters, WA. Steele gained his PhD from the University of Adelaide in 1976 for research on secretory IgA antibodies and intestinal immunity to cholera. He has worked at a number of institutions and universities in Canada, UK, and Australia. He has participated in many interviews on other platforms on many various topics, and Ted has written and collaborated on many scientific papers. So, Ted Steele, welcome back again. I was looking at that some of those previous ones over 3 years ago since we first caught up, and you've been very generous with your time, not just for myself, but many other people looking to try and make sense of the medical world around us. So, welcome back again.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having me back. Yes, I'm looking forward to today's conversation, because I think a conversation is the way to do this rather than getting interrupted by ads or blocks or that sort of stuff. So, anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
No, absolute pleasure. And as I said, a lot of water's come under the bridge since then, Ted, since we spoke last. Even in the last 3 years, there's so much evolving. And, we've talked about, and because I'm very privy, I'm lucky to be in email communication from yourself and many other, very strong academics. So I see a lot coming through, through my emails. And one of the things that, I picked up a bit, and Judy Williman's another one, and yourself, one of the things that come through is in regards to censorship and gaslighting of academics over the years. And you, as well as Julie Williman, and Julie as well, Judy, have been heavily, censored and misattributed on platforms like Wikipedia. And you actually pulled funding from them. You used to be a funder of Wikipedia, but that changed, didn't it?
Yes, Judy has had a much more extreme, well, I've had pretty extreme experience, but in the most recent one with vaccination, she's had an extreme experience, as did Andrew Wakefield almost 20 years before. But they're the two big gaslighters, but certainly I have been, no question. Now, the Wikipedia thing's interesting, because Wikipedia started with Jimmy Wales, and I've forgotten his associate, but they founded it about 25 years ago, and it was a very good idea. It was a public knowledge encyclopedia where all topics could be edited and updated by the public and other interested professionals and people that knew a lot about a particular area. So it became a very reliable first default go-to source for many people searching on the web in the the 2000s. From the 2000s, and just 7 years ago, I became a donor, annual donor for me. Just a small amount, but I gave them their $52 a year, and there were millions like me, I'm sure, that could see that it was a really good resource. Then something really dramatic changed during COVID, and I say about 2020. I put my finger on it. It was the time it became. Well, the long and the short of it was, in my particular case, it was quite extraordinary what they did to me. It wasn't even to do with COVID. It was to do with my own big professional interest in the mechanisms of somatic hypermutation, which is the mechanism of how antibodies vary after vaccination in the blood. And it basically depends on reverse transcription, and that's being 99% almost validated now by all the evidence, okay? But reverse transcription always has been a controversial topic, dating to the late 60s and early 70s, when Howard Temin and David Baltimore discovered reverse transcription, that is RNA reading back to DNA. Okay, that's the key step. Prior to that, the central dogma of molecular biology was that it's DNA, RNA, protein, right? Information from the genetic material flows outward that way. But then in 1970, after many years' research from Howard Temin, and there were a lot of forerunner things that produced the result, Howard Temin and David Baltimore proved that an enzyme called reverse transcriptase does in fact exist in one of the RNA tumor viruses. And that heralded a major revolution in the revision of the central dogma of molecular biology. Now, I was a young student at university when that happened, and I was starting my PhD. And by the end of my PhD, I was fully cognizant of the huge wave. And by just after I finished my PhD and moved to Canberra and then Canada, my life changed, because I had a Lamarckian theory of evolution based on all these Howard Temin discoveries, and I articulated them very, very clearly. So I then had a very controversial career for the next 30 odd years or more, convincing the world that there was a lot of data supporting it. So even up to 7 or 8 years ago, I could go into a site on somatic hypermutation, because that's the first part of the Lamarckian process. Somatic hypermutation, that is mutation of genes in our bodies, and then anything successful that helps with health and benefits gets transferred to the germline. Okay, it breaks the Weissman barrier. Well, even up until about 6 years ago, I could go in and make sure that the site on the mechanisms of somatic hypermutation was updated and correct, and the information accurate, and the reverse transcription mechanism articulated with its evidence, all the evidence, peer-reviewed journals, articulated correctly. Then about 2020, something changed. I could no longer do that. Then I discovered I was blocked. And then I was discovered I was banned for at least 10 years of doing any editing on, and we're talking about molecular sequence evidence. We're not talking about something highly controversial like origin of COVID or the climate change, or any of those things that touch highly emotive buttons, or even the origin of life, which touches a highly emotive button. It's to do with the evidence clearly showing that the mechanism was based on reverse transcription. And you know what they've done? They've not only banned me, but the site on somatic hypermutation has basically been corrupted now. I have been ablated and erased from the published peer-reviewed scientific record. Now, that is extraordinary. To me, that's extraordinary, because that is scientific misconduct. That is the corruption of the published record, which is generally accepted, the literature. That was so egregious. Well, I got angry, like anyone would. So I immediately pulled any donations every year. They keep contacting me, and I keep explaining to them why I pulled the donation that doesn't register. But then I discovered other people far removed from science like me were getting banned. Adam Crichton, the Australian foreign journalist for The Australian, received the same treatment. Then I heard other stories from other people. A lot of people were getting banned. So at that point, I realised Wikipedia was totally discredited. And now when I do a search, when I use Google search, which used to rely on Wikipedia, I stipulate in my questions and searches, you are not to rely on any information coming from Wikipedia. Now, of course, Wikipedia now is on the ropes because its donation rate has dropped. The founder, with Jimmy Wales, has broken ranks with the other guy. I've forgotten his name now. Sorry about that. Anyway, he's broken ranks publicly, and he's condemned what's happened to Wikipedia. So Wikipedia's finished, basically. I'm sure it's been done to Judy. I know it's been done to my colleague Chandra Wickramasinghe. There are many, many people. Now, why are they doing that? I'm just so puzzled. Why do they want to ablate? Do they want to keep the world totally ignorant of scientific information? They clearly do, don't they? There are powerful forces now, and they have to be commercial forces that have got a blacklist of people, scientists, public figures, anyone, and all of those people have been ablated.
Mm. Yeah, make a very good point, and you've been very, and you've been very, you've been vindicated in your view on that, because it was, I think it's Larry Sanger is the name you're looking at.
Larry. Yeah.
Larry, and he's come out. It was an Epoch Times report.
Yes.
He says the site needs a radical change. Larry Sanger said that the website has become biased against conservative and religious viewpoints, but he sees a way to fix it. But not just that, but obviously, as you say, academic research, valid, research and opinions, or based on scientific evaluation, like yours, like you were just discussing, has been massively captured by it seems to be an agenda, and it seems to be just a big broad brush across it, which kind of leads me a little bit into Ted, is the scientific journals and in general and so forth, and studies, and the academia hiding certain studies that don't fit the narrative, or don't put them up for publishing. The medical journals seem to be doing the bidding for many corporations like Big Pharma as well, and it's created scientists to self-censor. So and we I picked up on an email chain where you picked up on a little bit on this, and I'll see if I can share it quickly, just to give a bit of context, and I'll share this up. And I think that we were talking about this article here, Science Under Siege, and you were privy to a bit of an email chain on that, how external parties unrelated to scientific quality and rigor are attempting to interfere with publication process. So this is in recent days, the situation surrounding the attack on the article by David Schweiker, Jessica Rose and Kevin McKernan, entitled Quantification of Residual Plasmid DNA and SV40 Promoter Enhancers Sequences in Pfizer BioNTech Moderna mod RNA vaccines from Ontario, Canada. So the point they were making there, with that, and other things that I was bringing up, is that the medical journals and other third parties seem to be influencing a lot of what's happening into counter narratives, so scientists wanting to speak against it. Are you able to speak into that a bit further?
Oh, yeah, it's a huge battle. Let me just give a bit of history. I'm a traditionally trained scientist, albeit controversial, but even in that era, in the 70s and into the early 80s, I could get alternative views out, because even some major editors, like the editor of Nature, had a conscience. They realised they were, trying to ablate somebody. So, there was at least some balance, and you had recourse. Furthermore, I had a lot of friends actually in the scientific community, despite my controversial oath, who realised I was a potential unexploded bomb that could go off at any time, but also backed me to the hilt, and they supported me. So I had a very protective, nurturing environment until even through the 80s, where the really big changes did take place in science, up until early 2000s. I was protected from this lethality. So I could get papers published in a decent way in peer-reviewed journals, low profile and high impact. And I somehow did it for many years. The big change occurred in my assessment, and Judy Weilerman would say, in the terms of the vaccine, problem, was sometime in the 1980s, and a change took place on a number of fronts. First of all, it became obvious to me that the Nobel Prize had got completely corrupted. That was the first thing. It really upset me, because as a young scientist, you look up to that, and you could see that all of the previous discoverers were all worthy of the prize. Okay, that was the first thing. I won't go into the background of that. But then the next thing that puzzled me was the way universities had to commercialise and earn, which is fine, I think, but to the expense of the freedom of the academic or the scientist to make a call in their area of discipline, in other words. But I turned out to be a tenured, well, I sort of had tenure. I did. I thought I had tenure. A tenured scientist, in fact, has the real, freedom to articulate, even in public, a, potentially important point that's of public interest, beyond, in their domain of knowledge, which is, of public interest. But the changes took place. In the vaccines, as you know, the Reagan administration, for some reason or other, let the pharmaceutical industry off the indemnity. They had no longer legal recourse from the general population for any vaccine injuries from about the mid-1980s. And that meant that as time moved on to the present, thank God we got Robert F. Kennedy, but to the present, it meant they could basically, let's be blunt, any poison could be injected into any person without clinical trials. They said they did, but they never did clinical trials. And it's manifestly clear on some of the topics we're going to talk about, no doubt, on the childhood vaccination register. They couldn't have. Where's your control group? You can't do a clinical trial. It's obvious. And to say the clinical trials or some experience was generated from adult populations, but that's far removed from a developing baby in the first year of life. Anyway, that's another topic. So life for me began normally and then gradually got corrupted, but I was lucky to be protected until, of course, I was sacked by the University of Wollongong, and then that upturned my life, my family, and the apple cart, because if you lose your source of income at age 52 and you've got a young family or just growing up, it can be devastating, and it was. I admit that. And I also admit that I was partly responsible in the sense that when I saw the corruption of standards occurring with my own students, I simply couldn't remain silent. You see the dilemma?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, and all of us have those sort of dilemmas in ways, and different decisions in life. But anyway, there was a progression of the total corruption of science that took place. Happened on a number of levels. But for me, the Nobel being corrupted, I noticed this in the early 80s, that was just astounding. So that meant everything else. And so over time, what happens is as standards drop, the bar gets lower and lower, anything can happen in science. And that's what's happened. We've got active censorship. The major journals are controlled by big commercial interests. So therefore, high impact major journals have automatic default mechanisms to prevent publication of anyone like me coming up with, a novel interpretation or a novel explanation or a different evidence-based interpretation. And I've tried it, and it's impossible. But I should say this, at the level of impact factor journals up, say, below 10, and by impact factor peer-reviewed journals below 10, I mean, say, up to 5 to 10, those that appear in what's called a still reliable peer-reviewed database. It's called PubMed for the medical sciences, PubMed. And if you can get your paper listed on PubMed through one of the PubMed listable journals, that are legitimate, you can at least get it out on an unbiased list in any search that comes up, okay? And people can then say, okay, this has been peer reviewed. But you see, things to do with bad information about vaccines always got parked in other journals because they couldn't get into that list. It would appear some of them would appear on PubMed, but the way it was presented and the title meant that it would be missed on searches. Do you see what I'm getting at? So you're right about that. There are mechanisms where they can keep below the horizon lots of critical information so that even other scientists or other academics, are ignorant of what's going on because their searches are not picking up what they want. I found out about this critical information about the childhood register and the vaccines from Judy Weilerman. She drew it to my attention. And when I saw that plot in the 2009 global survey on the number of vaccines, you might want to show this now. I think this is an important plot. The number of vaccine shots.
Is this the Miller and Goldman one?
Yeah, that figure.
Is that one?
That's it. And if you look at that figure there, we've shown it before, but in the context of what we're saying, see, so this appeared in an out-of-the-way journal. And I say that because a recent colleague of mine, Professor Paul Goldwater, who is a SIDS specialist, a sudden infant death specialist, He couldn't even find this paper in his normal searches, right? It was only a chance encounter with me on the Independent Academia EDU website that got me in touch with him, and then it took the scales off his eyes. He didn't know about this data, you see. So yes, you're right. There are mechanisms to hide it. Now let's just explain what this is. Why don't we do the one on the right, the figure on the right? That's the easiest to follow. Mm-hmm. On the x-axis, we have the mean infant mortality rate, right? The number of deaths per thousand. And these have already been filtered by Miller and Goldman to ensure they're nothing to do with accidents. Right? You know, these are genuine babies that don't wake up, they die in the first week of life, okay? And that's that. So the rate is per thousand. Yeah, so, you know, the axis goes there from about 2, let's say, to the top of the range till about 6, up, and that occurs, and that's occurred against, you know, a y-axis, sorry, an x-axis, which gives the number of vaccine shots that babies get in the first year of life from low number shot countries like Japan, Scandinavia, on the left-hand side, okay, just about there, to high shot countries like Netherlands, Australia, Canada, United States, and United States is the top of the list. Now, this is the 2009 survey for the world, okay? And notice there's a straight line going through the various groups. It starts from the left, going up through the mean. Now, that's a very important line, as I try to keep explaining to people. That is a statistical regression line. That doesn't show just correlation. It implies to the statistician doing a survey cause and effect. That is, when you get a linear regression line with a significance value of p less than 309, okay, that's real. That says we've got to investigate what the vaccine schedule's doing to children. That's what it says, immediately alerts. Now, Miller and Goldman have been trying to get these things published in peer-reviewed journals in the mainstream medical literature, and they haven't been able to achieve it. So I felt a responsibility with Paul Goldwater, myself, and Reg Gorzinski, then later Dr. Robin Linley, to publish some papers in the peer-reviewed journal, the Medical Research Archives. Okay, it's not at the top of the list of peer-reviewed journals in the medical literature, but it's certainly a well-serviced peer-reviewed journal where many medically qualified people publish their work. So that's why we published this year these 2 papers. Now, we did it for a very specific reason, because the standard criticism against these plots that you saw before, it was, it didn't appear in a peer-reviewed journal. We can't take it seriously. But it did, just didn't appear in a peer-reviewed medical journal, so they couldn't take it seriously, you see. See how subtle this censorship is? So that's why I focus my energies with Paul and Reg and Robin on getting these phenomena and clear causal association into the medical peer-reviewed literature. That was the goal. It's simple, wasn't it? That was the goal. Then we made contact with Children's Health Defence Fund and all the people associated with Robert RFK Jr. and Mary Holland and all that. And through you, you helped me make those contacts. And then they interviewed us, and so we got it into the profile, you see, as a peer-reviewed assessment. That was the reason. That was the reason I did that, and Paul did it. Although I think Paul, he's a bit older than me. He was probably, and he's more, and he is a genuine a sincere medical specialist, trying to understand the sudden infant death syndrome. And he had years of, he was labouring against his own brick wall with his colleagues for years at University of Adelaide Medical School. And so it was a natural collaboration when you think about it. And so that's, So in a nutshell, that's how we broke that particular censorship barrier, by just persisting and getting it into at least one peer-reviewed medical journal.
Yeah,
Now,
and this is, I mean, that chart you showed is pretty great, because I mean, a lot of people keep talking about the Bradford Hill criteria. They talk about correlation doesn't need causation, but that chart is massively important for
yes,
to silence that kind of dissent, isn't it?
yes, it should silence it. In 2000 and a decade later, Miller and Goldberg repeated the assessment using a slightly different database for SIDS and a wider number of highly developed, economically developed countries to 46 from the original one in 2000 was 34 to 46, the same correlate, exactly the same. In fact, and then they had additional things. They did analysis of the adverse event a database at the CDC, and showed Miller and Goldberg and their associates showed clear relationships between babies getting the shots and then incidences of sudden death within a week or two of the shots. Okay, clear, absolutely crystal clear. But they got them again published in Curious, which is a new journal. It's peer reviewed, but it's slightly off the beaten track again. You see, but so in our papers we tried to highlight the fact that Miller and Goldberg have persisted. They're still around. They haven't gone away. They got that linear causal relationship 2009. It still exists 14, 15 years later in another big survey. And secondly, that criticism has been non-existent, except one. But it's hung like a bad smell in a lift on the internet by a non-peer-reviewed student paper. I think it's from Women's Brigham's Hospital in Boston, where the supervisor wanted their students to criticise the paper, but it was gobbledygook. It was what they did was they pulled all, not just the 46 countries, but they pulled every country. That's ridiculous. Many countries don't have reliable records. Look, they did everything wrong from the point of view of any form of analysis. Now, Miller and Goldberg, highlighted this, and he said there's only one criticism that's appeared. It's hanging there like a bad smell on the internet, and it won't go away. So they had to completely dismantle it. You see what the obstacles are being thrown up? It's just amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely, and the massive search platforms and the algorithms are geared towards that. So they'd probably throw the article that you just mentioned up, and not show the one that you've been involved in, and
use the fallacious conclusions from that article. Yes,
100%. And just to make the point too, it's obviously ongoing, and because you mentioned university capture and all that sort of stuff, but this isn't from a medical side of things. This is more a cultural thing. But here in Australia, again, the Epoch Times reports about 3 academics being cancelled for dissenting views, warn intellectual freedom still at risk. Obviously not from a medical side, but more sort of cultural discussions. So it's absolutely happened.
The other two, but Peter read, but I sort of recognize. Yes, I know it's still ongoing, no question.
100%. And one thing that really concerned me, Ted, was watching a Del Bigtree episode where he had the undercover conversation with a scientist that had written a journal, and it really was going to explode a lot of information about what's been happening in regards to the vaccine space. And he actually when we talk about self-censorship, he chose not to get that published because of the attack that he would get from the big corporations. Now, that is another thing. So not only do we have scientific journals, being infiltrated doing shady stuff, whether it be search algorithm companies, whether it be whatever, but we now have scientists, and have for a long time have scientists self-censoring themselves for going against the narrative, at risk for losing their job and being cancelled and funding and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's just outrageous, really.
It is outrageous, yes. Of course, I passed through all those stages many years ago, so they're factors, but I just try and use all my guile and wit to get things published in peer-reviewed journals the best way I can, and then use it as part of the weight of evidence, because it's in a peer review. So I've stuck to that, but it's not easy. Every and I noticed this years ago when I was but I learnt those tricks years ago. Every paper's like a military operation, getting it published in a peer-reviewed journal. So I've learned the skills of that, but it doesn't deny these other things are going on. But Peter Reid, that's outrageous. I didn't recognise the other two, but I know Karen Reid was
James Nuzzo and Fiona Gherkin. So Peter Reid, Fiona Gherkin, and James Nuzzo.
Yeah, well, there's a few of us here. There's no question, but when I look back on my own personal battle in 2001, when I was sacked because I was fully tenured and opened my mouth about soft barking, but you see, you've got to realise, and it's still going on now. It's $1 billion a year industry, overseas students, and you cannot apply the rigid standards of my era to them. In other words, it's terrible, But the point was that the only reason I survived, got through, was that the legal system hadn't fully corrupted itself then. Because that legal system has gone completely woke and extreme left wing. Back then, in 2001, I was very lucky that the federal court still had really good judges on. And it took me 18 months to fight the University of Wollongong. And in their final appeal, where they overturned everything that Wollongong University did, and I simply had to be compensated. That took 18 months, that battle. But even then, I can't give you the details. In the final weeks of that, even after the court had ruled, the university still pursued me and doubled down. So I then had to use every ruthless tactic I'd learnt over 50 years to bring them to heel. And I'll give you a glimmer of it. I decided to make sure I had the email addresses of every union, NTE, a union member in Australia. There was 8,000 in different universities. By the way, the NTEU were publicly saying they were supporting me, but they were undermining me in every way because I was an embarrassment to them. They had to get rid of me out of the system, right? So I had the union against me, I had the university against me, and I had the press against me, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian, and they had them against me because I was not only rocking the boat, I was disrupting their nice, comfortable narrative story that they'd already just published about me. So everything was right. Everything was a lie, you see, back then. And when I look back, it was amazing that I won the battle. I was very lucky, and it was the chairman of the Federal Court Appeal. He was absolutely ropeable, and he said it from the bench. I was sitting there in the audience. I couldn't believe that the way the judgment came down, and they must have known I was there at the back. Anyway, one of the judges said, "I wonder if Dr. Steele's in this courtroom." Nothing. I kept my mouth shut. I just listened to their judgment, and it was just extraordinary judgment. And then afterwards, the chair of the federal court personally sent me his judgment to me personally. He had my address, and he just wanted to say that so that back then the system worked. With Peter Reid, it didn't work. The High Court overruled his freedom to articulate concerns about the way the Great Barrier Reef was being interpreted. How extraordinary is that? So the legal system's been corrupted too now.
Yeah, such a bloody, and it kind of ties into kind of another thing, a bit of a topic that many academics on your side of the fence are up against, not just, the Australian public or, globally. It's this gaslighting of people and gaslighting of academia. But, there's also, things that I wasn't aware of because I was quite naive, before 5 years, but even things like astroturfing and, muddying the well and all these sorts of things. There's a massive campaign that's very well funded to delegitimize people like yourself, so even people like me that have been trying to research over the last 5 years will throw up people like yourself, McCullough, Williman, all these people, and people would come back and it'd just be shut down because it's been controlled with massive funding, massive media platforms. It's a massive concern, isn't it?
It's a massive concern, and there are public figures that are, like Robert Boy at the University of Sydney, Associate Professor Dr. Paul, Griffin here at the Mater Hospital, and others. The public, Robson, the former chair of the AMA. They get freely published in the media. Their ludicrous recommendations keep getting published, even in the Australian. The Australian is culpable. It's got a lot of blood on its hands, actually, over these issues. And it's massive. But of course, I've heard that the Murdoch family, through their associations, through the, their support for the vaccine and the childhood vaccine from the Murdoch, that they're not breaking ranks. So there's a powerful phalanx suppressing information into the public domain and gaslighting, as you say. The two most notorious examples are Andrew Wakefield, how he was eventually completely drummed out of medicine. Thank God he's being resurrected by Peter McCullough and all the others, and the Children's Health Defence. And Judy Wileman, it was absolutely disgusting. I can remember I had other problems at the time when Judy's controversy broke, but it was the University of Wollongong, so it was close to my heart. And I didn't fully understand the details of it all, but it was just a ferocious public campaign led by Friends of Science in Medicine, the AMA in Australia, a whole group of people. But when I read her PhD thesis, that's what it was based on. They were trying to pulp her PhD thesis before it got, thank God the University of Wollongong didn't buckle. So I can be balanced about it, right? They didn't buckle. PhD went through. I've read her PhD. There's probably not many people have, but I meticulously read it, went through it. And a lot of information and a lot of, it's massive. So I still have to go back to it from time to time to get, a frame of reference or something. But that's when I found out, that's when I realised that not only was she telling the truth, but her research was deep, extensive, methodical, and logical. And in the end, that's what won the day for her, make sure her PhD was accepted. But in the meantime, the media did such a job on her.
Absolutely.
So there we are, it hasn't changed, has it? Look, I got a feeling throughout history, unfortunately, if you're a pioneer, this is one of the crosses you have to bear. It's just got worse in the modern age, much worse because of all the media manipulation, even social media manipulation. So, but the tendency to run with the herd and ostracise, the prophets or those telling the truth or the more truthful way has been there since time immemorial, I think. Unfortunately, it's part of the human condition.
Yeah, and as I said to you earlier,
go on.
While we're chatting, this is why I said I was so grateful, and so many Australians are grateful for people like you that have put your head above the parapet. Because this is the thing, right? People say, these grifters, there's a lot of people making money out of it, labeling McCullough and that. I mean, these people suffered massive persecution, censoring, attacks, and that. Why would you, in your good mind, not just let you go? No, I'm not doing this, and just do what that guy did, that Del Beatry interviewed the scientist, and go, well, I'm not going to publish this paper because I don't want to get what's coming. So all these people that say, a lot of grifters, I mean, they're just ridiculous. Who in their right mind would willingly want to put themselves under attack if they weren't genuinely interested about humanity and having the truth and science out there? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. People pushing that narrative. But just jumping down back to now our institutions here in Australia, and there's been a lot of commentary on that. Wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on that, on the Therapeutic Goods Administration and the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, and even the AHPPC. All these organisations that controlled pretty much medicine, but also regulated doctors from speaking out even about and going along with the narrative. Do you think these institutions should be rebuilt from the ground up, Ted? Are they not fit for purpose anymore? I mean, clearly I think I know the answer, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously they have to be, but the particulars are very revealing. Well, I don't know, 90% or more of the TGA's funding comes from the pharmaceutical industry, so that's ridiculous. The TGA is a box-ticking organisation and follows directions from the CDC in the United States, basically, or FDA. Doesn't do any serious evaluation for itself. That's my assessment of them. AHPRA, Australian Health Professionals Regulatory Agency, well, that is just a an organisation to punish any doctor who's caring for their patient and steps out of line with what that doctor would consider would be genuine health advice to that patient. Okay? So direct intervention in the doctor-patient relationship is appalling. We know many of the prominent figures that have been delisted. Some got back on after huge fights. Others got back on after very less profile fights, but got back on. But many have still been deleted. And Mark Hobart, poor man, had a series of heart attacks in the end, in his case. I don't know how he's going. So there's definitely corruption. There's profound corruption. And they still have a solid grip on it, despite the successes of these individuals. See, each one of these cases that gets through it and survives becomes an example to all the other running the herd. God, I don't want to go through that, you see. So you get internalisation of the censorship, as you say. I've got a great GP right now, but I witness it with him. You can imagine he gets a lecture on mucosal immunity from me when he tries to offer the annual flu shot. And he's very good about it. He listens carefully, takes his mask off so he can speak freely to me. He listens carefully to me, but he says nothing because he knows what I'm saying is. But he helps me, gets me introduced to all the correct specialists, gets me to all scripts. He's on my side, you see, but he doesn't commit openly to me. I'm very lucky to have a GP like that. I'm sure there are many like that, by the way. Many, just silently doing their job. I feel there are in my bones. I picked him out at random, essentially. I didn't know who to get when I first got to Brisbane 2.5 years ago, and near where my son lived, where I spent several months when I was settling into my own place now, there was this medical centre near where my son lived. So I immediately booked in there because when I got back from Victoria after all the lockdown, I was in a very bad way health-wise. When I got up here, I was in a mess, had a few accidents, but I was a real mess. I was a psychological mess, actually. And I was very, very lucky to have a GP like that who took me on and stuck with me, listened to me. And then he said something really revealing, and I think a lot of genuine doctors think this. He says, Ted, I learned most of my medicine from my patients. That summed it up. So let's just hope there are many like that out there, but are not putting their head up because they still have to support a family and, pay a mortgage and that sort of thing. So,
this is the thing. This is how they got so many people, 80% of the population, if not more, buckled to that because they had bills to pay, the mortgages and, their lifestyle. And that's how they managed to coerce people into falling into line and stuff, didn't they? So, and I mean, look, this is the thing. I mean, not the average person now, I think a lot of people are waking up in regards to having those strong conversations with their doctors and not just, there is, I think we've done a lot over the last 5 years. I think it is getting through where a lot of people are.
Awareness, just the fact that the vaccine take-up rate is dropping and is alarmingly, it's still high by my standards, but it's dropping. So that means that they're not making as much money as they used to. In the United States, it's even more dramatic. There's a massive reaction against the vaccines in the United States. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought we might, sort of segue into, obviously from those regulatory bodies into a brand new created one, Ted, and I've been sort of following, the Stand Up Now Australia is doing a bit. They've actually raised a lot of concerns. There's a bit of concerns being raised, and they're asking for, a lot of transparency and accountability in regards to the Australian Centre for Disease Control. So I'm just wondering if I could get your take on what your views are on this new Australian Centre for Disease Control.
Well, my immediate one is I'm not up with it as much as you are, but just looking at Mark Butler's visage as Chief Questioner, I don't expect anything to change with the current crop of politicians. I think it'll be just smoke and mirrors, quite frankly, and people like Judy Weilerman and Gigi Foster are adamant that the corruption is so ingrained, though you might be able to, remove many of the more obvious pathways to corruption, to corrupting the system, but the pharmaceutical industry and the powers that be will always find a way to corrupt the individual. So unfortunately, corruptibility is part of the human condition for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing is with that.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the thing with that with the CDC is people in our circles have obviously been following what's been happening with the CDC in America and how wrong they've got a lot of it, and how captured they are. So, there's a lot of concern obviously about the CDC in Australia being exactly the same thing when unless you can rebuild the TGA and other institutions like that, the CDC is just going to go down the same path, right?
Exactly, yeah, they have to be totally rebuilt. I should point out the pernicious influence of the Friends of Science in Medicine organisation, which a lot of people don't realise has been a titular organisation that's corrupted all those bodies, the AMA, they created AHPRA, a whole lot. Friends of Science in Medicine is the name of the organisation. You can Google it or look it up, but I don't want to go into further detail. I know a lot of the deep background, and that's been a profoundly corrupting influence on Australian biomedical science and Australian medicine, and has been so for 30 to 40 years, particularly the last 20 years. So, it's like all the background boys in politics, all the ones that are really pulling the strings of who's going to be the pre-selected candidate, and all that, and where the money's coming from. That operates in the biomedical health industry in Australia the same way. The same sort of corrupt mobster type individuals are involved in the medicine and the healthcare system in Australia. So knowing that, and when all that dawned on me over a number of years through various deep throats and whistleblowers, I realised that the battle is horrendous. I'm not being pessimistic, I'm just being realistic. That's all. So there's constant vigilance and constant attempts through mechanisms of all the different social substacks and podcast channels to get the level of awareness of the aware population. I don't know how big it is in Australia, 30-40%. But at least getting into that, anyway.
Yeah, well, that 30-40% would be quite nice. I'm thinking if you look at polling, let's say people look at voting for people, parties like One Nation and other sort of places like that would be quite aware about what's happening in the world, because they kind of flow towards that. I think we're talking about 12 to 15% of Australians would be I think aware enough. So I think 30 to 40% would be lovely, because there is a point where you would critical mass to turn things around, and I think we're not quite there in Australia, but there is a massive awakening, and there's a lot of pushback. So the people that are awake are really working hard to push back against the beast system, this massive system, this global corporatist system that controls sorts of because a lot of it's about money and power and control, and they don't want to let go of it, right? So
it's pretty well that's what it is. That sums it up, follow the money. So yes. The awareness level is far greater now in the United States, and with, thank goodness, RFK Jr. got in, but he's got a horrendous battle on his hands. I get the daily feeds from Children's Health Defence and a few others, and like you probably do, and the number of attempts to undermine him and overrule are still going on. It's even there. So, but you see, the United States is a freer and more open society than ours, therefore it's more chaotic. That's the definition of a truly free society. It does in fact get chaotic. But ultimately, I do believe, I have great faith in this, that the open and free democratic society will ultimately triumph against evil, and does in fact triumph against the totalitarian dictatorships around the world when it really comes to the crunch. They make a lot of mistakes getting there, but when it comes to the crunch, they do. Now, I don't know whether that's misplaced faith, but looking at history, just the last 100 years, it suggests that, yes, that's what's happened. And Trump is a totally imperfect human being, like many of us are, but it's extraordinary that his cut through with probably 50% of the US population has been extraordinary. Now, So I don't know how many people that is, but let's say half of that, so 150 million people in the United States, are becoming more aware of many things that they weren't aware of before in lots of different areas. So I have faith that that can transpose to Australia, but we're a gentler society, and we are probably a little bit more gullible than, a raucous, open society like the United States. Because with openness comes chaos as well. It can be chaotic. Israel is a chaotic society because it really is, despite its other things that are happening there. It's the only democracy in the Middle East, and there are a lot of forces very similar to the same forces in both sides counter as the United States. So democracies, if they're truly open and allow the alternative, can be chaotic. I just leave it as a thought, really, that these are the sort of things we're up against in everything we do. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And moving along, one of the big stories, Ted, obviously in the last sort of week or so, and wouldn't mind get your thoughts on, is this story out of and we're talking about the CDC, Australian CDC, but this news coming out of autism and vaccines from the CDC. So it's a massive turnaround.
Yes.
People are obviously saying it's a massive turnaround. So the claim that vaccines do not cause autism is not evidence-based claim, because studies have not ruled out the possibility that infant vaccines cause autism. Studies supporting a link have been ignored by health authorities, and we've talked into that a little bit now already. HHS has launched a comprehensive assessment of the causes of autism, including investigations on plausible biological mechanisms and potential health links. So that's a pretty huge story coming out, and it kind of talks a little bit into what we've been talking about being the studies and links being ignored by health authorities. So we've kind of already talked into that. That's huge news, isn't it, Ted?
It's huge news. Yes, it's a major thing, and that's exactly that was that was a direct topic of our second paper in Medical Research Archives, which I also know we made sure through you and others it got through Children's Health Defence and got through to. I remember talking to the journalist. I said, "Are you sure RFK himself will see this paper?" He said, "Well, it'll be on his list of things that he's aware of." Anyway, the point is that if you reflect back on that vaccine schedule, that linear curve, you have to ask the question. These are the ones that die suddenly, right? Anywhere from 2 to 6 out of 1,000 die suddenly. What about the survivors that get through the first year of life and may have problems later? What about them? And that's what the topic of our second paper. If you go through all of the unknown factors in the childhood vaccinations, the big one being there is no control group, and knowing what vaccines can do to a developing baby in all sorts of ways, and older people, it's staggering that given that this rise, from 1 in 10,000 autistic detections 30, 40 years ago to 1 in 30 now. People say, "Oh, well, it's just greater awareness, that we're classifying anything as autism." No, I don't think it's that at all. I think there is a real association between the damage done to a number of generations of children in the first year of life that survived and all these neurological disorders and syndromes that we now have. I'm certain of it. It's just from and we actually covered the evidence in our second paper of the actual molecular cellular mechanism. I'll just give you one, for example. Edward Butworth, or Butmore, I can't remember his name. He's a researcher in the United Kingdom on the role of systemic inflammation, not on babies, but just people generally, the role of systemic inflammation, that is getting an infection in the blood or high levels of immunological activity and the release of these ubiquitous cytokines, these infokines, that are like hormone molecules that get into the circulation and activate other cells, but they also go across the blood-brain barrier, you see. And he's an expert in systemic activation and depression in his patients. Okay, and after many years' research, and he wrote a great book about it, summing up all his experiences, but it's been confirmed by others that they were treating depression the wrong way around. You know, if someone comes in and they've got systemic infections, there's a good reason why they're depressed, because the brain is getting tizzied up and stirred up in ways it was not meant to. Look, just as a tip, one great little indicator just from your annual blood test for that is C-reactive protein. That's still on the register for tests, and you can get it done. And if that's high, that means you have some recent systemic stimulation, which you might be depressed. The point I'm trying to make is that we've known about these rich connections between the body, let's say the immune system, and the brain for a long time now. And yet none of those studies have been done in children, but done in adults. Just imagine what it's doing to the children. Think about it. You see, so that's where I'm coming from, through that knowledge. So it doesn't surprise me at all that autism has to be on the list, and ADHD, Asperger's, all of the whole list, the whole gamut. So autism spectrum disorder, the people, try and deride that because, it's not full autism, like a mother's right. A child with full autism is far further down the train. But autism spectrum disorder can be very discerning, for children growing up, because they have certain defects that other kids don't have, right? So none of this surprised me from the evidence, but it's just wonderful to see the CDC backflip, and clearly the influence there of RFK Jr. and the people that he's hired has played a big role. They've forced that flip. They forced it. It had to be done by a decision. It wasn't done by any compassionate health-related decision by the CDC, because the CDC literally had to do it. It was a political decision, and it's wonderful that it's happened. Let's hope it happens in Australia. Let's hope that Butler in Australia sits up. I don't think so.
No. Look, and it is a big thing, because I know America's vaccine schedule is massively bigger than Australia's. Australia's vaccine schedule has grown over the years, but I thought I'd share, because I had a friend message me, and he was saying that it's probably, talking about kids, better to hit them over the head when they are older, as their body is better able to cope with the shock. The problem method of intramuscular injection, the process results in a myriad of maladies, and how long will it take to investigate each one? Next, we'll be revisiting the dangers of giving 3 vaccines together like MMR. This debate will never end, and I think some people, especially some key players, are more interested in keeping the debate going than getting results. So he's sort of saying, and I think Andy Wakefield pointed to this when he was doing all his research, is the not just the vaccines they're getting, the big schedule, but the amount they're getting at the same time. So, and this is one of the things that Andy was raising, I think, over the time as well. Are they getting too many at once, Ted? Is that a massive concern? And especially,
in paper we go through all that. But look, Miller and Goldman, did that incredible, adverse event, and incidence of SIDS after a series of shots. It's a causal relationship again. It's clear. It's clear. It's clear. When Andy Wakefield, listened to the mothers and said, "Look, this didn't happen before. The baby's not responding. But she had the shot," and that's why he got involved with his patients, right? But now we have all the evidence. That's exactly what's going on in the first year of life. Now, this is my own personal. If I was starting life again with a family, I would not allow any vaccination for the child, at least in the first year of life. Any vaccine, any sort, therapies and treatments, to handle respiratory infections, but not any vaccination. No, verboten. And, traditional doctors like Paul Goldwood, who was SIDS, he sort of, he would still hesitate at going that far, but I think he's gone that far now. And I know one of my co-authors is also an MD, Dr. Reginald Kaczynski, probably wouldn't go, but he will go that far now. Basically, and the reason being, it's a total black hole. We have no clinical trial information on children with vaccine, none. It all comes from adults, as I explained before. But secondly, given that, that we have no knowledge of these things, then I think, and all the evidence points to a causal association. That's the key thing here, the causal association. Then I think we should just give up on the vaccine schedule for children in the first year of life. Have none whatsoever. Now, there are some parents who, with the means to do so, can do it, but many families can't, can they? Because they've got to get the child looked after in a childcare centre, and one of the rules is the kids have got to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's ludicrous what's going on. Anyway, I don't want to harp on that anymore. It's obvious, what the barriers are. But my recommendation is now, if you can, do not have your child vaccinated in the first year of life, and even later, question your doctor on all the adverse events and other things. In other words, do not, meekly succumb to it. I don't get the annual flu shot. Never have, because I knew years ago it couldn't work. Anyway, that's another issue. But the point is, that's my advice as an immunologist who was brought up thinking that immunisation was a great thing, a whole discipline built on it. And I've now come down the complete the other way, totally.
Yeah, because you were very critical even with the COVID things, is that because it was a respiratory virus, you're not a big fan of intramuscular injections into to help with a virus.
Oh, yep. All the evidence has, and we counted it all again in our 2 papers that we've on SIDS and in other papers, and in peer-reviewed journals, by the way, we've recounted this evidence.
Yeah.
All the evidence indicates, and throughout COVID, that none of the in the arm COVID shots anywhere in the world protected anyone from COVID. None. Big zero. Yet people like Dr. Paul Griffin, Robert Boy, and these other advocates constantly spouting that it did save a lot of lives. It didn't protect one. When you say that, people, it's a disconnect, what's the word? A discognition, or you get, that can't be true. How could the whole world be delivered a lie like that? Well, it was. It was just a lie. A complete lie. Any mucosal immunologist that got trained like I do knew it was a lie. Just knew it was. But many didn't speak out. I immediately spoke out because I just knew it was. As soon as I was aware of what, as the vaccine was being rolled out, because I had my attention on another problem, I just can't work. And it took a bit longer for Robert Clancy to come to the party because he's more of a medical, and they trained a little bit differently from a scientist who doesn't hold back sometimes, like me. But nevertheless, there's a few, but there's still a lot that have remained silent. There's still incredible. All my immunological colleagues, quite frankly, I've lost respect for them in Australia. They've just remained silent. Not one's come out and supported me. Not one.
Yeah. Well, my good friend, Dr. Bruce Pay, we catch up with him regularly on a weekly basis, and he's the same. He's lost massive respect for his fellow medicos, or in many careers for people that have just went along with this whole farce over this period of time. And just getting back to, because you did bring it up just then about the mothers, and not providing a vaccine for children, in the first year of their life, and this whole no jab, no pay thing, which obviously was instigated by Scott Morrison back in the day.
That was disgusting what he did. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and it just talks into this whole full, free, and informed consent. And you and I both know a very fiery Elizabeth Hart. And I've got a lot of time for Elizabeth.
Yeah,
she's like a dog with a bone. Now she really unpacks this full, free, informed consent really, really well. You're obviously. Yeah, you're obviously on that same page, aren't you? With that, obviously, clearly from what you've just said.
Yeah. Yes, of course I am. Yes.
Yeah. So where do you sit with doctors, like with GPs, and you've kind of already talked into this a little bit, but with doctors thinking they need to give exemption, because we have this big discussion with Bruce and Elizabeth about, Bruce gave exemptions during COVID and Mark Hobart did, and Elizabeth is much stronger on this point. She's saying, well, why the heck should any doctor be give an exemption to someone? People shouldn't require an exemption. Do you feel the same about that?
I agree with that. I completely agree with that. Totally. But look, we just reflect on doctors, and I won't give you the people who gave me this inside information on the education of doctors, but it more than rings true, because I trust this man, and you actually know him. He's a very trustworthy doctor. I asked the question point blank. During medical school in the late 80s or 90s, when this person would have been trained, did you have any lectures on the mucosal immune system in relation to conventional vaccination? And he says, to be honest, Ted, none. We never got any lectures. Then I asked more questions around the same theme. And you know what? I've come to the conclusion that the pharmaceutical industry totally corrupted all medical schools and literally prevented immunology knowledge being taught to young doctors, graduating doctors. So they had come out with literally no knowledge whatsoever. None. Not even rudimentary immunology 101 knowledge.
Mm.
So it's got the re-education has to go in medical schools. There has to be a course on the mucosal immune system, the systemic immune, just the sort of stuff we outlined in our second paper. Mucosal immune system, the systemic immune system, and the role of vaccination in medicine. Now, that would, if that was a full semester course, no doctor would come out from that expressing any ignorance about the dangers of vaccination. None. Not one single doctor would. But that's not going to happen, you see, because that would be counter to the medical professions shaping the landscape of the medical doctor. Because, every day they get bombarded with recommendations, take this drug, recommend this drug, all the day. Every day is coming into their inbox. They're getting the pharmaceutical industry's latest newsletter or latest recommendation for this medicine or that medicine, and vaccines are part of it. So it's not going to happen until we change the rules of how we educate our doctors. It's going to have to be that fundamental. It's going to be that ruthless. You're going to have a tyrant come into each medical school and insist that there's an entire semester on the immune system, mucosal immunity, and systemic. Now, why do I say mucosal? Because 99% of all the pathogen infections we ever get come in by the mouth, the nose, and the eyes. That is, they confront a mucosal surface first. All the others, bites, stepping on nail, they're all peripheral, right? The great bulk of all insults that our body has to fight from a young baby right through life come in through the mouth, the nose, and the eyes. And the urogenital tract, in the sexually active group. And all those are mucosal surfaces. And you know what about the mucosal system? It's all interconnected. If you activate the mouth or the nose mucosal system, it alerts the gastrointestinal tract and the genitourinary tract. It's a totally new. It's not. All the experts know it's different. The mucosal immune system is a system in its own right, and it's quite different from the blood-borne system. They communicate, but they're different. You see why I keep harping on it? And the education of the medical profession of that knowledge, just knowing that, would be a revelation. They would then realise that all the common cold, flus, all the shots that they constantly said you have to give on an annual basis are ludicrous. They would realise straight away that they're totally useless and therefore not necessary. Forget about how dangerous they are. mRNA, that's another order again. But you see what I'm getting at. So I think the revolutionary change has to come of literal educational tyrants taking over each medical school and insisting that at least one semester on mucosal and systemic immunology is taught, so that you don't have any doctors coming out under any illusions that they weren't told.
Yeah. Well, there's probably and great recommendation. There's probably a direct obviously a reason why it's not, because obviously, the big corporations don't want people educated. They want the reps to be able to go around the doctors and say, this is the greatest thing. The big corporations have said, can say, we've done all the research internally, everything's safe and effective and it's good. All you've got to do is just prescribe it. We don't need you knowing any more information.
Joe Bill.
It's okay. You don't need to know about it.
Look, I think that if I was going to suggest anything, a takeaway from this conversation we've had today, that recommendation is the most important. We have to literally change the way our medical profession is educated and taught and graduated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Simple as that. But that's what's going to be required. Now, that's going to require, again, a political decision at the top in Australia. Mm. It's going to require an enlightened Prime Minister who makes sure he appoints a health minister who then gets the legislation through Parliament on the health system to ensure that that becomes mandated in medical school education. Mandated. Okay, we have to use that word again, but that's it. That's the only way it's working in the United States is come through RFK Jr. So we're going to have something similar in Australia. But I don't even think that they even raised this issue of medical education the way I have. I'm not even sure that's even hit the register yet in the United States. But to me, that is the key one. If the world's going to be left a better place by people like me and others who know this, then they'd all be mucosal immunologists, a genuine one, will be saying what I'm saying. I'm representative. I'm not an outlier.
Anyway. That's a good message for people that are viewing. Is the only way that we see changes by people sharing this information. That people like Ted and others in regards to this. Reform is very important for a lot of things. And I mean, I think the massive industrial complex, whether it be pharma or others, have had way too much control over the way that our lives are shaped. And I think that what you're talking about is a massive reform that's needed. Ted, I'm conscious of time, but I do want to just cover something that was sent to us, and it was through the conversation on the email by a friend of both of ours in regards to this. I'm just going to bring this article up because I did send it through again. Is this game-changing flu vaccine to protect SA children like Clive and others? Now, this is the nasal spray that they're talking about. Now, I'm just going to quickly just read, while that's up there, what our friend sort of wrote, just a little bit parts of it. And he's saying that the article that because you shared one, pointed out in the Australian looks to be getting everyone used to the idea of and benefits of nasal vaccines, with the well-used vehicle of partial truths being used to transport total deceptions. He's highlighting the likely deception. We all know how Australia, its government and its academic institutions have geared up with globalist and taxpayer money to be the manufacturing and education hub of the mRNA genetic terrorism ideology. That's his words. The article, and no doubt countless ones to follow, if unchallenged, look to move towards nasal mRNA genetic terrorism with the double-edged sword. A, it's not painful, so it's not a jab for the kids so they can get it. And B, get used to taking your mRNA vaccines through the nose. As close as we can, genetic instruction to and through the blood-brain barrier, other than IV, and a mRNA bath for the lungs. And he's saying, I'll call it a blood bath. What was your thoughts when you seen that? It was obviously part of the email chain as well.
I actually triggered that particular discussion, actually, and Ben Bornstein and others, and Elizabeth and Judy, they all jumped on me for all of it. Look, I was pointing out the fact. No, they didn't jump on me. They've got a perfect right to criticise what I said, because everything they said is true, what you've just said. But I was just drawing the attention to the fact that one penny is dropping at least, the importance of the mucosal immune system, but of course it's in the context of coercion and mandate and getting people used to taking it now this way rather than that way. When in actual fact, the research is not being done yet properly. I've always qualified it, and when I was referring some papers last year on some of these vaccines, I insisted that the authors address safety issues. I went through these issues. And that paper got published eventually, but they addressed all my issues and said, and so the point I'm trying to make is that that they're very quick to adapt to the intellectual background that's going on. All the different things about how important your mucosal, but then they're going to adapt it to making it easy to deliver what they really want to do. I completely agree with that. And I think that any nasal spray of any sort, forget about mRNA, has got to be rigorously safety tested. That's the first thing, through various animals and then humans, volunteers, and then have ways of tracking how the adverse might occur, because we're very close to the blood-brain barrier there, particularly in the nose, potential rich interface there. So, but look, all the other things, getting people used to taking their annual nasal shot is repulsive to me. I've always viewed it from the point of view of, if you're going to have something that might work, you've got to learn how to harness the power of the mucosal immune system. But that requires a lot of research and hasn't been done, by the way. Not from the point of view of orientating for vaccines. All the basic stuff, which I summarised before, has been done, but not the vaccine. So it really comes back again to how it's going to get perverted by the vaccine industry. So I think there's got to be a moratorium on the whole thing, quite frankly. And this jumping on the bandwagon of, come and get your annual nasal shot or spray is just repulsive to me.
Yeah. Well, they've it's really just a money-making ticket for the big corporations, because ultimately government mandates or says you have to have this, or this is what we're doing, and it's actually a nice little cash cow for corporations. This is this public-private partnership in full force. This is that whole thing. So it's very interesting, and so people should be very aware about these. This is a great way to do it because your child's not going to get a needle and all this sort of stuff, but it's the implications that go from it. And Australia seems to be in the forefront of a lot of this. The mRNA, we've got the Moderna, massive Moderna investment in Victoria, and here even in South Australia, mRNA technologies being investigated and so forth. So look, I think people just need to be really aware and watch this space going forward. So no, really, look, I really always love catching up with you. I love your insights on stuff. And look, people want to reach out or follow you. I mean, there's on academia, there's your full, so anybody that wants to see, obviously Ted's credentials, you can do so, on the academia website, but also all your articles and everything up there on academia as well. Is there a better another place that people can search you out, Ted, and follow up on what you're...
No, that's really if they're interested in the basic information, that's the one. It's a no bells and whistles. Well, it's got a few bells and whistles now, but no bells and whistles. Just a list. Yep. Although it's offering I upgraded it slightly to premium, and it's offering a podcast 5-minute summary. And you just it's an AI generated one. It amazes me how good they can get. But all that does is just introduce you to the topic of the paper and the main message, and then it just advises you. Each one advises you, go out, and make up your own mind, which is fair enough. Actually, I'm quite happy with that. But yeah, so they're all there at that site.
Excellent.
And I'm happy to have private email conversations, but I must say that I've got a person should at least try and do their homework before they email me, because I don't want to be dismissing something simply by they haven't understood this or that. In other words, I'm going to have to go through again what I've already published in a long email. I'm not saying that as a burden. It's just that I'm just aware of it now. I just have to do it. But I do take the trouble. A serious question and structured question, I will respond to it. Yeah.
You do, and you're very generous with your time, even with podcasters that want to find out more about, your thinking on lots of things, and I do appreciate that. And just as we do close, Ted, you and I started talking in our very first interview, and it comes up a fair bit with Bruce and I on our podcast, because he follows you, loves your work as well, about the whole idea of the panspermia, the viruses coming from outer space, and that. Where are you at with that since we spoke? Obviously, that's constantly evolving, isn't it? Is that getting traction in sort of more, traditional circles, or is it you're still getting massive pushback on those sort of?
Yeah, still that problem. Although Chandra and I have seen on my website our latest paper on that summarised situation as of about five months ago. This current furore about this Atlas 31 comet that's come into our solar system, gone beyond the sun, is leaving it again. It's caused a lot of comical news reports in the media. I just find it amusing, that it's got these geysers coming out of it. Oh, that's unusual. Every comet worth its salt, most of them, pretty well all comets, have an internal watery interior in one form. And as they go around the sun and heat up, it's like a pressure cooker valve going off, and you get a geyser coming out. And that's the trail you see from the comet. It's that. But they're all like that. But they're trying to make out this one's different, but it isn't. It's no different from the others. They're saying it probably came from another galaxy. Well, that's fair enough. I'm happy with that. And that's what happens in the universe. But look, our views on that are pretty clear, but they had a practical application, as you know, that everything about the origin and spread of COVID-19 was completely upside down because they didn't understand these things. And so that's why I harped a lot on that. But all of that's there too. That particular article, that lab leak theories are untenable, is at my website. Anyway, it's up to other people to investigate that themselves. But my position, a few months, I gave a really long interview on this to you, and that was one that I found very useful later on. But also Robin Tudor interviewed me about 2 months ago on this, and we actually went to the same space you went to, faith and God at the end, and my position on that has not been not much different, just that except that I left a scientific conclusion at the end of that one, which struck me on the death of my mother and my sister. Where does that vitality go? That vital life force go? And you notice it when you're dealing with the person who's just died and their corpse. And I've given my 2 cents worth there. I'll raise it again now that if the work of Henri Bergson, who famous French mathematician, scientist and philosopher, wrote a book called Creative Evolution just over 100 years ago, and he dealt with the life force. Of course, he was derided by many other scientists for talking about the life force, but it is a true force. Every living system is extraordinary in its electrical organisation, that way it's molecularly assembled with its electrons, and it's totally different to inanimate objects, totally different. It's chalk and cheese. But then at the instant of death, that organisation disappears. I go through it in some depth in some of the papers, just disappears. The work of Mei Wan Ho, great scientist, was monitoring that in her experiments on that instant of death. What happens to that? What happens to the organised biophoton emissions? So I said, well, if physicists can have an equation like E equals mc squared, where energy and mass are equated through the square of the velocity of light as a constant, and they're related, then you could add another equal sign that the life force, let's call it LF, or the soul, where does that go? Is that conserved just like the other physical parameters are conserved? So I've just left that as a question. I don't know the answer, and I never will know the answer. But if you wanted to take scientists right to the edge, That's one way of taking him to the edge. If you're going to accept that there's conservation of matter and energy in space-time, then have another equal sign to LF, call it the life force, Henri Bergson's life force. This organised electrical energy, which I've just talked about. Where does that go? Where it goes somewhere, but is it conserved? You see? So you actually, that argument's interesting. It's a bit like Pascal's wager. Sorry, I don't have to. Sorry, no. Sorry. Yeah, I'll get back to. Yeah. So the Pascal's wager was that if you doubt the existence of a God, fine, but look at it from the purely gambler's point of view. If you back and bet big on the existence of God, and it's true, and it is true, there is a heaven, then you win big. Look, I just find that an interesting wager. So my actual suggestion is actually similar to Pascal's wager. I'm saying that where does the life force go? Is that and the soul, if you like? Is there a place that's conserved with the rest of the universe where the soul is located, where all the souls are located? That's all. I don't know the answer, though. I don't know the answer, but that's as far as my thinking's gone now. I have a long life in science. Unlike others, I didn't benefit from a deeply religious education. I think I would have benefited from it. I know my sister would have benefited from it. I would have benefited a little bit, but it was in a different era. It was the 50s, highly repressive era, and the Catholic Church at that time had its own draconian rules, and as children. Look, I don't want to go into my history, but the point is, I didn't get that sort of more balance to my education growing up. But I think about it. Therefore, I'm dogmatic about it. Anyway.
Well, which is important to be able to unpack these sorts of things and that in that sort of detail, especially for someone from a, the mind where you are, the scientific mind, and to look at those and be open to that. And I think the last 5 years have actually pushed more people closer to that sort of way of thinking as well, I think, and I think personally. So, and people know where I stand on this sort of stuff. But if people, we did have that was a great conversation about 12 months ago as well. We went into that a little bit further. That's on my Rumble there, pushing back on the lab leak theory and person-to-person spread. That was that one. If people wanted to go back and visit that, but today's chat is no less interesting and informative, and I really appreciate your time, Ted. So I really genuinely appreciate the input that you have in these conversations and giving us the time. So wishing you all the best, and hope to catch up again at some stage as well, and keep you. I know you're a very busy man, so keep pushing, keep punching up, mate.
Thank you very much.
I'd like you to see and hear something which we feel is rather special.
In this God-given land of ours, Australia, this proud possession, our own piece of earth, that was built by our fathers who pioneered our heritage. Here in Australia, the land of our birth. Here in Australia, we treasure love and liberty. Our way of life, all for one, one for all. We're a peace, loving race, but should danger ever threaten us, let the world know we will act.